Hello, good afternoon, or whatever time it is, wherever you are. Uh, Thank you for coming to the Santa Cruz Pickwick Club discussion of Bleak House. We are a little bit past the halfway point in our discussion of the novel, and we're fortunate to have Barb Raney back as our discussion leader. Um, I want to make a couple of general announcements, just sort of waiting while people are coming in. Uh, and one is to apologize to Mike Hay and who was our discussion leader last month, and really apologize to everyone, especially those who are reading the novel for the first time, that I violated my rule or our rule, our convention about no spoilers. And in my
So,
eagerness to talk about spontaneous combustion, I reveal something that was not contained in the assigned reading for last month, which is the fact that Esther is disfigured.
I don't
We
know
learned
that.
we learned that after uh, after monthly number 11 has begun, and Esther describes her illness. Um, and I also need to apologize because uh, I ended our discussion of spontaneous combustion at the very end of the hour. And uh, I have a rather unconventional interpretation of
Right, which we agree with.
spontaneous combustion and of Esther's disfigurement. And um, so we didn't have an opportunity to discuss John's theory about spontaneous combustion. And fortunately, Barb Raney, Barb, our discussion leader, has agreed to devote a little bit of time to uh, today to our discussion of John's theory about spontaneous combustion. So thank you, Barb, for agreeing to do that. I have one other announcement before I turn things over to Barb, which is that uh, we've had a very good suggestion from a member of the Pickwick Club, a regular member, who suggested that one thing we should adopt as an assignment and as a practice for our future discussions, and perhaps even for today, and that is that everyone who comes to the Pickwick Club discussion should uh, select a passage from the assigned reading, a favorite passage or an important passage or an interesting passage, a beautiful passage that you would like to discuss or have the group discuss. And I think that's a good idea. And we may not always have a chance for everyone to um, discuss their favorite passage because we're a fairly large group. But I think it would be a good reading practice for you as you uh, prepare, as you reread, as you read for the first time, perhaps, the assigned reading to mark a passage and be ready to propose that we talk about it when we uh, have time. And perhaps today, even at the end, if there's someone who has a passage that we haven't talked about, uh, we could uh, get a volunteer or several volunteers for that. So anyway, that's something I hope we can do. So that's my introductory remarks, my welcome to everyone, and welcome back to the regulars. And I'll turn things over to Barb now. So thank you, Barb.
Okay, thanks. Courtney, if we can just look at the first slide. These chapters um have so many plot changes and plot reveals and all kinds of things going on. So I thought that as a way to get to all the things that we encountered in these chapters, that maybe we could go through all the new revelations that we have uh, read about and just do a little catch up on all the things that have happened in these chapters. So, Courtney, if you'll do the second slide, I have a little list of all the different things that, as I was reading, I just sort of went in order of what happened from 33 to 38 and where we have all these reveals that occur. So let's start with Mr. Smallweed. I always want to call him Smallwood, which is must say something. But anyhow, Courtney, we can probably take this down. I've got the list here with me, so we can see everybody's face. What do we learn about Smallwood in this section? Yeah, Courtney.
We learned that Mrs. Smallweed, her brother is Mr. Crook.
Yes, yes. And what can we deduce from that?
Hmm.
It looks like Glenna also has her hand
Yes.
raised.
Yeah, go.
Well, we know there's some mystery in the papers that Crook has in his possession, and now we can figure out that Smallweed is going to lay claim, is laying claim to them, and this very much disappoints and frustrates the plans of Mr. Guppy. And let me just say that when I taught at Oklahoma State, I had a colleague, Smallwood, who was married and divorced 8 times. So I am not going to mistake small weed and small wood.
But there's a story there, isn't there?
Yeah.
Anyway, anyone else? Yeah,
Sarah.
go ahead, Sarah.
I just wondered, like it seemed like he is finalizing his inheritance so simply and so quickly, and in contrast to the entire story of the book about how complicated it is to complete inheritance cases.
Yeah, I was reminded how we in this book we have all these mirrored characters, and Smallweed is kind of a his game that he's pulling is not nearly as damaging as some of our larger game players, but it mirrors what is going on with other characters. Yeah, Kathy?
Well, I don't know whether can you hear me?
Yes?
Okay,
Yeah.
great. Well, it's foreshadowing because at the heart of what's in that collection are the letters of Mrs. Lady Deadwood or whatever. I always forget her name. To her or the father, Esther's father, and this giant Titanic battle that's going on between the lawyer and Esther's mother, is just foreshadowed here because they're both fighting in certain ways to get a hold of these letters.
Yeah, good. Well, did anybody think that we had sort of a sudden change in Mr. Smallweed's character and way of doing things? No? Okay. Well, he's not quite as comedic as a,
Right, right.
it was sort of funny that he had to be propped up and carried around, and but his attitude about breaking the pipe and all this stuff is not really funny, is it?
Dickens had a
No.
No.
book.
Yeah,
Yeah.
come on.
Huh?
Kathy, did you have something else? You're muted.
Because he was not what he is now, a moneylender. And we talked about that in the last in the last meeting, that sort of means that he's Jewish. I mean, not that that has anything to do with it, but he's gone from a kind of a thrower of pillows at his poor wife to sort of the gatekeeper of these letters, and sort of going against what's his name? Who's the military guy? George.
George?
George, yeah. I mean, he's become a sort of a person who's upturning the whole trajectory of how you get to the letters.
Yeah, good. Anybody else? Uh, anything about Judy and her, how she works into this part with small weed? Well, Courtney, real quickly, would you go to, I don't have numbers, 4, I guess, to see the picture? No, the next one. There we go. Um, so look at her there. That look on her face is kind of, I thought, her, once again, it was a reveal to me that her character was a lot more insidious than I originally thought. Okay, thank you, Courtney. Anybody have a thought about that? Okay. Well, let's go to Captain Hawdon. What do we learn about Captain Hawdon in these chapters? Oh,
John, are you on the verge of saying something?
did you say
I guess we could say, what did we learn that's new about
yes, that's
Captain
what I mean.
Hawking?
Yes.
Yes.
What is new that we didn't know before?
What,
Yes,
what did
Kathy.
we already know, and what did we suspect, and
Yeah.
what new do we learn?
Kathy, you're muted again.
When it's phrased like that, I mean, I think through the chapter about George and Smallweed, having, calling in all the, he was only paying interest and now he's paying the whole deal. Um, that you find that, I mean, Hawden's back there, he's dead now, but, he lives on, and, it's the story of everyone trying to get to who he, they're attacking his ex-wife. I guess they were never married, the father of Esther. But at this point, they've not sure what they've learned. I have a hard time about that, but they're sort of spreading out their war plans to to find out through the letters. They don't want to know who Esther. They just want to take down her mother.
Well, to whom do we know now that he's connected? How is he more than the letters plot? How is he connected to everything?
Well, he was connected to everyone who lived there, in the building before he died. And so I don't think anybody really knows the story. I mean, any of the other residents, but this is this new resident moving in who doesn't know the story. I honestly don't. I can't answer that question. I don't even know why I'm talking.
Okay. So do we want to know anything else about him other than about the letters?
Sarah has her hand raised. Would you
Okay.
like to add something?
Yeah, so we know that he did leave a bunch of letters, and like Guppy is looking there for one kind of information, and others look for another kind of information. But I think that it also said that Crook used his letters to study the reading and writing that he did.
Yes. Crook's another one we probably should talk about, but anyway.
And
Cynthia, do you have something to say?
I just wanted to say that as a reader, I understood that Halden and Lady Dedlock were lovers by this point. And I knew that he was the father of Esther. And that I think that no matter who was reading it and what time they were reading it, this would have become clear.
Yeah.
But the characters inside the novel haven't figured that out. The readers have figured it out, but not all the characters. Some have suspicions. They have pieces of information, but they haven't put the story together completely. So as readers, we're ahead of the detectives, if we can call them that, who are trying to piece the story together. Guppy has some information. Joe has information. Talking Horn has suspicions. Crook has the proof, but he can't read, and so he can't interpret the documents that are in his possession. It's, everyone is circling around the information, but no one has quite put it together, or if they've put it together, they haven't got the proof. And the handwriting is the clue that links this from the very beginning of the novel. And so we're following the handwriting.
And just to add to what I was saying, as a reader who is also acting as a detective,
Yes.
it's great fun to know more than anybody else.
Yeah. Yes.
Although we may be surprised.
Yes.
We think we know everything, but do we really? Do we yet? There's still more of the novel to read.
And Cynthia, as modern readers, we've gotten to the place where we expect for the narrator to trick us.
Yeah.
So, it is another layer of perception by the time that we are in right now. So in many ways, it makes it more fun because we're thinking that there's a possibility that the other shoe will drop, somewhere. Yes. Lana?
Yeah, I think what we learned in this chapter is that more about Captain Hawden, about his social status, because when we first encounter this character, he's living this incredibly dissolute life. He's, doped up all the time and eking out a living, and he does not seem like a plausible candidate as the father of Esther or the lover of Lady Dedlock. But then Mr. George is this very upright man of military bearing, and he has this profound loyalty to Captain Hawden. And so from that, we can infer that Captain Hawden had, at one point, positive qualities, which we don't see directly, but which help fill in the mystery around how this dissolute, druggie could have had a fling with Lady Dedlock.
Yeah, great. That's definitely one of the things that's, as I said about Smallweed, we're finding out about the character of this character, and the same thing with Hawden. We're finding out more things about who he might have been, and and the handwriting. Yes. Who has good handwriting? And my grandfather came to the United States when he was 18 from Scotland, and he wrote my grandmother just beautiful, beautiful love letters, but they were horribly spelled and showed a person who was not very well educated. But then we also have letters from his mother who are just perfect grammatically, spelling, and very flowery, and it makes you, what does it mean to be able to write well, especially in the Victorian age? Who writes well? And that's another one, back to what Cynthia said. We are in this time period where we are constantly seeing things on screen and judging people by how they spell, right? We have all these bits of information that come to us, and the minute that this person makes a grammatical or spelling error, we kind of go, well, this person doesn't maybe know. Cynthia Moore?
Just to keep talking about Captain Halden, who's very fascinating. We knew from the beginning that he was a law writer. So we knew that he could understand and translate and write law language, and that his writing was beautiful. So there was already a seed planted that he was an accomplished person. What we got in this part is that trauma background about his losing the love of his life and his child, and that maybe that's where the addiction and poverty came from.
Anything else about Hawden? Okay, let's try Dear Richard. A lot happens with Dear Richard in these. Well, somebody go. Kathy?
Well, Richard has obviously you learn that he's cut off communication with his uh, guardian, and you learn that, because in one of the chapters with Esther, he's telling her that, and that he's still. Well, they describe, or Dickens describes, the chancery as a disease. So he's in the second or third part layer of the disease. Like Parkinson goes on for so long. He cannot stop thinking that, the money is going to come back to him. And his guardian has, refused to let him see his cousin, who, he's in love with. And so they actually secretly meet through Esther. But he's pretty far gone, and it's again foreshadowing, because you can see he's not going to get better of the chancery disease. He's just going to fall apart further. So, you learn sort of this, to me, it's this stage of, and I love thinking about it as a disease, the chancery, all the people that, sit in court and, eventually die of it. So,
And doesn't Dickens do a brilliant job of showing his irrationality? He just seems he talks as if he's making a rational argument,
yeah,
and you just can see, and we've probably all known somebody that thought that their horse was going to come in
yeah.
and everything was going to be all right for the rest of their lives, rather than sorting out themselves. And I think Dickens did a wonderful job with that. Sarah?
Two things that one thing that he accuses Jandis, he suspects him, that he prevents him, he convinces him not to pay attention to the Jandis case because it interferes with his interest. So what happened between the two of them became very severe. But what I liked is the way Jandis explains it to Esther and says we have to be compassionate, we have to understand him, we cannot just get upset at him. It was very beautiful.
Mhm.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. Anything else about good old Richard?
One of the things I'll jump in. Excuse me, Karen had her hand up. Why don't you go, Karen?
Okay. But I'm going to go a little far afield, so maybe you should go, John.
One of the things I always think about is that Richard has a name that is important, because Richard is the nickname for Richard is Dick, and it's the Dick Whittington story, the young man from nowhere who has a famous cat that catches rats, and he becomes the hero of the folk tale. And Richard is in that position. Richard is a dick. He's and one of the good pieces of good fortune that comes to the Dick Whittington figure is that he marries the boss's daughter and becomes a wealthy man, and eventually becomes the mayor of the city of London. And so that plot is something that Dickens is working against. This is a dick who does not have good luck. He becomes an addict. He becomes subject to the disease. And we know what happens to people who believe in chancery. They get infected with chancery disease. And he's one of many addicts in the book. And his predecessor in the story is Gridley, and Gridley has died, and Richard now takes the place of Gridley in the story, and so
Exactly.
we know what's going to happen with this Dick. So
Yeah.
Dickens is writing against the Dick Whittington story.
Right.
So Karen, go ahead.
Okay. I often think of disease as a way of connecting people in this book, which it surely is in terms of just these characters and what they exhibit. And I was thinking, we see Richard here start to spiral into this obsession that he will have. And when I looked at Barbara's list, it just struck me that, we could almost look at this text and the characters as a little mini asylum. I mean, it's almost like everybody is mad in some way. We can look at eccentricity at the extreme of madness. We have Esther calling Miss Flight mad, and it kind of made me go down a little bit of a rabbit hole while I was reading these chapters, and I looked up the whole notion of asylums in this time. And come to find out that caged birds were actually used in asylums in the mid 1800s to brighten up the environment. And here we have little Miss Flight with her caged bird. So I thought that was interesting. But just the whole notion that eccentricities in this text really become forms of almost mental illness at points, many, many times. So I think your list of characters just reminds me, from Skimpole to even Boythorn. I mean, everybody borders on a little bit of madness. Not that we all don't ourselves, but it's an interesting thing to think about, I think.
Well, and it's another meaning of the turn of the screw. I mean, we are delving into this various lunacies. Peter?
Okay. What interests me in the Richard chapter, it's very complicated, his discussion his discussion with Esther. You have to read it very carefully because he sort of like slips and slides away from her advice, right? But what strikes me as like just as important is not Chancery, but the fact that Skimpole is there kind of advising him. I don't think that it's Chancery per se that is the problem. I think it's that Richard has, it's provided him with an opportunity to believe this. Dickens has a different notion of a different attitude towards inheritance than, say, maybe in Oliver Twist. In this case, you inherit money because you don't have to do anything anymore. You're a member of the aristocracy. You're a parasite. You don't have a middle class job. Richard has tried twice to have a job, but he's very sort of indifferent, to doing it because he has this Chancery opportunity just to grab a load of money. He's like the Menendez kids, kill the parents to get the money. Except he doesn't go that far. It's because he's got Chancery there that's holding out the money. His parents don't have the money, so he isn't that evil. But he's the Skimpole in that chapter with Richard. I don't take Skimpole as a sort of like as a realistic character. I take him as sort of like a kind of a he's an example. All of his explanations of his behavior, are sort of exaggerated. It's like, if you had a parasite who was forced to give explanations of why he's a parasite, which parasites never do, or he's not realistic, but he gives you he's irresponsible. He'll just take whatever he can, and Richard is in that environment. Chancery provides him the opportunity of escaping from his responsibilities as a human being. It's like he's our modern example of a millionaire oligarch. and inherits $1 million and becomes Elon Musk. That's what he wants. Anyway, um, anyway, so uh, it's a complicated story, and there are conflicts. Like I don't know if Dickens has worked it all out, carefully as political economy, but he has a sort of he has an issue with people who don't take the responsibility of doing work, and work that's actually useful to other people. So Esther is an example of someone who, in however small a way, cleans the house, maintains things. Richard wants to be just an idle, I don't know, scion of wealth or something, So anyway, I'm interested in what Skimpole is doing there in that particular chapter. I think it's not just Chancery that Chancery provides him the opportunity, but Skimpole gives him the excuses, for being,
Well,
yeah. And I think John Jarndyce, John Jarndyce is another case of, well, John Jarndyce is just being too nice again. It's like he just won't lay into Richard like he wouldn't lay into Skimpole. We know Skimpole's a worthless rogue, and he's making excuses for Richard. I think I get a feeling that that's part of his character. He's not going to actually intervene and and tell Richard what's up and give him an ultimatum or something. Like Dick he's just being too nice. He should tell Richard, come on, Richard, just go to school, get a degree, get a job. Anyway, okay, that's it.
but remember that by creating these characters like Skimpole, Dickens has the opportunity to have Skimpole say these very critical things about what's going on in British society at the time. And because he's, what do you say, a child, pretends to be a child, he can say all these things. And well, like with Joe, I mean, Joe says some very profound things, right? And it's those characters are very interesting vehicles in Dickens books. But back to Richard. Anything else about Richard? Glenna?
Yeah, I wanted to say when I was reading the chapter where we see Richard's descent into this complete obsession, I know Dickens is not normally seen as a realist, but I thought this was such a convincing portrait. And it brought to mind, I have a fascination with Russian literature, and I read a 5-volume biography of Dostoevsky, who was a compulsive gambler. And this very much reminded me of how we find out that this obsession takes hold of Dostoevsky, written, as a biography, not as fiction. I think it's a brilliant depiction of how an obsession, because essentially what Richard is doing is gambling, not only his future but also his beloved's future on Chancery bearing fruit.
Yeah, I totally agree with you.
We should notice the name Chancery has chance in it. So
yes. Well, I don't want to leave Richard, but there were right at the end of the chapter he confesses that he's in debt again, and he also has hired this Bowles, who we'll talk about, I hope, and this man, as he is introduced, is pretty frightening in the whole scheme of trying to get rich from Jarndyce and Jarndyce. Yeah, Sarah?
I just want to add to this chapter that Pete said is the conversation between Richard and Esther is pretty dense and pretty deep. And when we look at what Richard says, it makes sense from his point of view. So he says about Jarndyce, like, why wouldn't I suspect him? We already know that everybody works hard to get the money. Why would I think that he's not one of them and does it in a different way? So he said, if this is the nature of the people in the case, why would I think that it's not Jarndyce's nature as well? And also, he thinks, and this is very common in our world, we know about bad experiences of other people, but we still want to try, and we think we can do it better. And he thinks, I can do it better. It just was such a slow process. I found a way to make it fast. So it's very interesting. The conversation is very interesting because he says things that you can make sense of.
Yes, that's wonderful.
Yeah.
As I said it initially, it's really brilliantly done. You might want to wonder, though, why it's done, but it is brilliantly done. Anything else about Richard?
Real quick, I just wanted to bring attention to the chat because Dorothy said that she thought of the poet Richard Lovelace, who writes of nymphs and shepherds and pastoral life, an unreal picture, and Richard is living in a state of unreality.
Yeah. Yeah, that is a topic that I another rabbit hole that I went down, Karen. The echoes of the romantics that are in this book, but we couldn't talk about that forever, but it is interesting. Pat?
Sure, I absolutely agree with whoever the person was in the chat. In looking at Richard, he's a ne'er-do-well. I tried to pin a psychological disease on him. Such a wishy-washy person. I cannot bring something up to call him, well, he's this or he's that, but I have disliked him for a very long time now. And so I maybe what John was saying, the Richard Whittington, I'm not familiar with that. I'll have to look that up. But you know what? Richard is a wastrel. Sorry, terrible thing. But that's my opinion.
Well, and back to modern day audiences, we want to find what happened to him, the psychology of how Richard turned out to be Richard. I mean, there must be a reason, right? You can't just be a criminal in our modern society. There has to be a bad mother or, a horrible thing that happened. That's just how we read things these days. Kathy?
Wasn't Richard's father driven crazy by the Chancery himself? Am I hallucinating that, or?
I don't think we know anything about Richard.
No, I don't think we know at this
Oh,
point.
okay.
Yeah.
All right.
We know he's an orphan. That's I think the extent.
Okay. Sorry.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
But Jarndyce does say that he was with the Jarndyce and Jarndyce case since he was in his crib, right?
Yeah.
So.
Well, we'll see. Perhaps. I've got Woodcourt on here, although there's not a whole huge reveal about Woodcourt, but what do we learn in these chapters about him? Yeah, Kathy.
He was in a shipwreck and he never made it to India. And he was heroic in that he, saved a lot of, potentially drowning people. And it's unclear whether he's coming back, but Esther, because she's now very pockmarked and, uh, unattractive, and, to herself. I'm not sure exactly what she looked like. I'm old enough that I had a smallpox inoculation, and it's a huge like circle on my knee, on my leg, on my arm. So I assume, she didn't look well. And so she is feeling like she thinks that she could really understand that she was in love with Woodcourt, and she was very glad that given, the status of her face now, that she never really said that to him. So that leaves another, what's going to happen next? Not really foreshadowing anything, but you think something's going to happen out of it.
Yeah. Cynthia?
I think we learn that Woodcourt was confiding enough in his mother about his feelings for Esther that his mother mounts a campaign to keep Esther away from him.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. Good. Yes. Well, so is he like that ideal one that got away? Nothing wrong with him, or it's interesting plot twist about him. Okay, Esther, what do we learn about her in these chapters?
Let me say one thing
Okay.
about Woodcourt, and it's that Esther thinks, or at least she says, that she has kept her affection for
Him.
Woodcourt a secret. And then she confesses to the reader, and now I must part with the little secret I have thus far tried to keep. I had thought sometimes that Mr. Woodcourt loved me, and that if he had been richer, he would perhaps have told me that he loved me before he went away. So Esther has, and she reflects on the fact that her face is now no longer beautiful, because we know that from the little boy who says, "Why is the pretty lady no longer pretty?" So Esther has abandoned her love for Woodcourt, or her dream that she calls her secret. But the thing that interests me there is, and now I must part with the little secret that I have thus far tried to keep. It's the little secret. Uh, it it's not a secret from us as readers, or from Esther's friends, from Ada and Richard, uh, because Woodcourt sent the flowers and all of that. But Esther is talking about the little secret. There's the big secret in this novel.
Yeah.
The big secret is the one that Esther has been, well, keeping. She is the secret. And so
Yeah.
I think that that's a deliberate play on the question of what is the secret in this novel.
And she keeps the flowers.
She keeps the
Right.
flowers, yes.
The dried flowers.
So
Yeah.
the love plot, the courtship plot that never really came to pass, has now been abandoned by Esther.
Mm-hmm.
And she's no longer beautiful, and so she's given up the hope, the dream of Woodcourt.
Oh, Pauline's got a great thing in the chat. And we can all look it up later, but yeah, I remember that very clearly. It's about the education system of the time. And I remember that very clearly where I can't remember who was talking about how the men of this time were not educated to figure anything out. I guess what we would call critical thinking, that there was, there was not any attempt to teach, has there ever been? That's another question, but that's our, um, but I'll try to find where that was at some point. All right, what else about Esther?
Lena?
I was just thinking, we're talking about Esther, but I was thinking that in a sense, in these chapters that we've read, both Richard and Woodcourt are auditioning to be the main character in a marriage plot.
Oh.
And we learn that though things look dark for the Esther Woodcourt romance at the moment, we learn that Woodcourt is remarkably eligible. And we learn that Richard is really going to flunk the test for being a good hero. And that makes me want to say, maybe 7 or 8 years ago, and I can't remember what novel we were talking about at the universe, but Helena Mickey gave a wonderful lecture in which she talked about the plot that figures in many Victorian novels, where the heroine is really, really attracted to somebody who's a dangerous choice. And so when we first meet Richard, he is seemingly so attractive and so appealing, but then we find out, the extent to which he's a dangerous choice. She cited a number of novels that have this kind of undercurrent. Anyhow, Esther has chosen wisely in the man that she chooses to have a crush on. And we'll see what happens next.
Yeah. Kathy?
Well, I think that what you see is how resilient Esther is, because I mean, she's already gotten through her horrible childhood with her horrible aunt and, really prospered with her guardian. And now, she's had on top of all this a horrible disease. And you can see that at first she's understandably not just, slowly recovering, and she goes away for a month. And, even though Richard comes in and Skimpole's there, she blossoms and she recovers. So you see that she's a really resilient character, and she's going to be able to, she has a huge strength, and that's shown in, her second horror, which is smallpox.
Pat?
Yes, I'll take the opposite point, and sorry to disagree with you, Kathy. But I think that Esther is fulfilling what she has been told since she was a kid by that evil godmother. She wasn't evil, but I think she believed she was worthless, and I think she is growing into her worthlessness with her disfigurement. Now, yeah, that may be totally incorrect. I don't know what happens to Esther at the end because I don't remember reading the end of this novel before. And maybe she'll turn out to be totally fine and get a new personality. But I think she is, to me, she seems to be fulfilling what what her godmother always told her, that she was worthless, and and I don't know about that. John, I'd like to get to that Lady Dedlock thing at some point where she's hiding her face because she doesn't want Lady Dedlock to be involved. That's complicating to me, and that's given me a few wakeful times wondering about that. Okay, thank you for letting me chime in.
I think we have that quote somewhere, but well, back to what Glenna was saying then, is she removing herself from the marriage plot? I mean, is that part of what she's doing? And and was it destined to be like that from the beginning? Because in the beginning, her aunt, I guess, is tells her that she should never have been born, right? She should never have existed, that she would be better off completely not there. So, okay. Lady Dedlock, what do we learn about her? Yeah, Sarah, you're muted.
So I think the bigger scene is her meeting with Esther. And we learn a lot about her in that meeting. So she comes to Esther, she thinks they are alone, and she comes with like a mother sympathy, not a regular face that she's putting out. She comes as a master, and then she realizes that Charlie is there, and she becomes her outside, the way she pretends to be, like proud and distant. And the entire exchange about Lady Dedlock, telling her I was an awful person and I did that and I hope that you forgive me. And Esther's reply, I forgave you already from the day that I realized you gave me life and I forgave you from that moment. The entire exchange is incredible.
Yes. And in this picture, we've got,
Yeah.
I don't know, there's a symmetry to the tree and the branch that's fallen down. And
so this is when Charlie was still there. So it
yes.
does feel like a mother.
Yes.
But when she realizes that Charlie is there, she changes and she returns to the regular demeanor. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes, it's almost hard to imagine that maternal person is in that person that has been described to us all along. Kathy?
Well, I mean, just to react to what you just said, it seems to me that she didn't know that Esther, as a baby, a newborn, was alive. I mean,
Yes.
she, to give her some slack there, it seems like at the church when Lady Dedlock came, and Esther was at the church too, because they live in adjacent houses, that some connection was made, like almost a DNA, or, animals can smell their mothers. Somehow the two connected. I mean, that's the most I could get out of it. But they know they know that they're a mother and a daughter. And the other thing about Lady Dedlock here is that she says at the very end, after she's apologized and cried and, knelt down to her daughter, but she says, I can't ever see you again, which sets up another, branch of the plot, because where's she going to go and what is she going to do? She's never going to see her again. And in truth, it is a foreshadowing because, you know, my guess is in reading ahead, or maybe I shouldn't even say
No,
this,
no,
but
no spoilers.
oh, shut up, Kathy.
No
Okay.
spoilers.
Well, it's foreshadowing. Let me just leave it there.
Yeah. Well, and is this another logical solution to the situation, or do we have yet another Richard type thing going on here? We don't know. We don't know.
Barb, maybe this is where I should talk about that picture.
Sure. Yes.
And Courtney, if you could go back to the Lady Dedlock in the Wood image that you just showed. And there's something else that Lady Dedlock does, is that she gives Esther a letter. And
Oh, right. I forgot that.
Esther takes the letter home and she reads it, and she gives a kind of paraphrase or summary of what the letter says. And I'm going to read that passage. It's on page 583. Safe in my own room, I read the letter. I clearly derived from it, and that was much then, that I had not been abandoned by my mother, her elder and only sister, the godmother of my childhood, discovering signs of life in me when I had been laid aside as dead, had, in her stern sense of duty, with no desire or willingness that I should live, reared me in rigid secrecy, and had never again beheld my mother's face from within a few hours of my birth. So strangely did I hold my place in this world that until within a short time back I had never, to my own mother's knowledge, breathed, had been buried, had never been endowed with life, had never borne a name. When she had first seen me in the church, she had been startled and had thought of what would have been like me if I had ever lived and had lived on. But that was all then. And what seems to me poignant and even worse than that, horrible, is the idea that Esther's existence was that she was a stillborn,
Yeah.
that she had died in birth. And this is the story that Lady Dedlock tells. And in the story that she tells, the villain is the sister.
Mm-hmm.
But here is Lady Dedlock saying, "Hello, Esther, I'm your mother, and you must forever consider me as dead."
Yes.
Which is a failure to recognize and accept her role as Esther's mother. And she says she's doing this in order to protect her husband, because this would crush him. It would be a stain and a disgrace if he were to know and if the world were to know. But it's also to protect Lady Dedlock, because it would be a disgrace on her. And so I think this is a horrible moment. It's a moment of rejection. Hello, I'm your mother, but you can never see me again. And Esther's story about the letter is that she was born dead and she never had a name. Remember, she never had a birthday at the beginning of the novel. Her birthday was never observed. And in this image, we have Esther's face is hidden. Well, she has smallpox or she's disfigured anyway. We see Lady Dedlock's face. And then there's the third figure, who is Charlie, more faintly etched in the background. And Charlie is picking flowers. But I think this scene is Esther's memory of her mother burying a dead child. and that Charlie in the background is a fantasy that Esther preserves of her mother's rejection of her at the moment of birth, and that this is Lady Dedlock in the background burying the dead Esther. And it's also, of course, Esther burying her doll. And Esther, in burying the doll, is reenacting the fantasy that she has about her mother's rejection of her. And even before the godmother comes into the picture, Esther has that infant trauma of the rejection by her mother. And this sense of not being loved by her mother, not being lovable, is, I think, the source of Esther's sense of unworthiness. And you remember the vow that she makes to do some good to someone and win some love to myself. So I think Esther's personality, Esther's structure, the structure of her living life is trying to win some love from somebody by being good. And I think that's a false self that Esther assumes in order to protect herself from coming to terms with the fact that her mother is dead and rejected her when Esther was born. That Esther is dead. She's that dead child, buried by her mother, buried, forgotten by the godmother. And that Esther, in some sense, is a ghost, both alive and dead. Lady Dedlock is a ghost, both alive and dead, and they're haunting each other. And that's the story of the Ghost Walk. And it takes me back to the story of the doll at the beginning of the novel. On page, it's in the first paragraph of Esther's narrative. And I'll read it just because I think this is haunting the novel. It's haunting Esther all the way. Esther's, almost her first words are, I've got to read this in order to get it right. I have a great deal of difficulty in beginning to write my portion of these pages, for I know I am not clever. I always knew that. I can remember when I was a very little girl. Indeed, I used to say to my doll when we were alone together, "Now, Dolly, I am not clever, you know very well, and you must be patient with me like a dear." And so she used to sit propped up in a great armchair with her beautiful complexion and rosy lips, staring at me, or not so much at me as at nothing, while I busily stitched away and told her every one of my secrets. That doll is Esther's mother. And Esther is doing with the doll in her play, in her fantasy, reenacting the moment of the mother's rejection of Esther. So I stared at the doll. She used to sit propped up in a great armchair. That's how Lady Dedlock often appears in the novel. With her beautiful complexion and rosy lips, that's Lady Dedlock. Staring at me, or not so much at me as at nothing. And there are two ways to read that. That the doll, of course, is inanimate. It's dead. So it can't focus. Its eyes cannot look at anything because it's inanimate. But it's also the mother, the living mother, that stares at Esther and sees nothing. So Esther is nothing. And that sense of being unworthy is mentioned here, signaled at the very beginning of the novel. Esther feels that she is not lovable because her mother has rejected her at the moment of birth. And even worse than that, she, or maybe her sister, has buried the dead Esther. And Esther does not exist. Esther is psychologically or psychically dead. So this image has both the good mother saying, "Hi, I'm your mother," and it also has the horrible mother who's burying the dead infant in the background. And the scene where Esther is present at the brickmaker's cottage is another reenactment of that horrible scene, because Esther there is forced to witness the death of a child. And so Esther is seeing that death take place and imagine her own death at the same moment. So this is another version of John's theory. It's a psychological reading of Esther that sees that there are, I would argue, two Esthers in the novel. One is good Esther, who's trying to do some good to somebody and win some love to myself. And that's a false self. Esther is trying too hard to be good. She is good, but she has to try and be good. And another passage I want to read is at the beginning of chapter 38. This is Esther's description of how she recovered from her illness. And she does regain strength. I don't want to overstate my argument, but there's also something forced about it, something inauthentic about Esther's goodness. So this is the beginning of chapter 38. When our time came for returning to Bleak House again, we were punctual to the day and were received with an overpowering welcome. I was perfectly restored to health and strength, and finding my housekeeping keys laid ready for me in my room, rang myself in as if it had been a new year, with a merry little peal. Once more, duty, duty, Esther, said I, and if you are not overjoyed to do it more than cheerfully and contentedly through anything and everything, you ought to be. That's all I have to say to you, my dear. So Esther has to persuade herself to be cheerful, because that's the way that she can reassure herself that she is alive. But because she has to say, duty, 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 remind herself to do her duty, there's something inauthentic about it, something false in that self that she presents to the world. Underneath that is the sense that she is unworthy of being loved because of her mother's rejection of her. And that rejection was played out in the scene when Lady Dedlock has the two servants, Rosa and Hortense. And Esther narrates that scene about how both servants show up, both Hortense and Rosa. And Hortense says, I came too because you asked for your servant to come. And Lady Dedlock says, no, I meant Rosa. And Hortense is angry and walks barefoot through the grass. And Esther witnesses this rejection of Hortense and the fondness that she has for her daughter substitute, Rosa, as a rejection of the ugly daughter and of her love for the pretty daughter. But for Esther, that's exactly what happened to her, is that her mother rejected her. For me, the broken branch in the foreground of this image is a reminder of the violence in this otherwise peaceful, bucolic pastoral scene. So on the left, you have the mother who loves, and on the right, you have the mother who does not love. And Esther sits in the middle. So I summarize, perhaps too crudely, the argument, but it's my reading of Esther's psychology. And it goes with the other spontaneous combustion theory that I proposed last time, that Esther, in order to protect her mother, disfigures herself. Other people get the disease. Charlie gets the disease, but Charlie is not disfigured. So the key thing, whether it's smallpox or whether it's the word smallpox, of course, is never used in the novel. It's the word that's used is the fever. But Esther, as I read it, disfigures herself in order to protect her mother from the disgrace that will come upon her if it is revealed. And Esther is grateful that her face no longer resembles Lady Dedlock's, because her effort at self-effacement has been successful. So I lay this out. I'd be interested to know what people think.
Sarah? Sarah, you want to go?
Yeah, so before I tell you what I think about what John said, I want to establish the timeline, because if I remember correctly, there is a scene where Lady Dedlock realizes that she has a daughter, that she was born alive. So Lady Dedlock, until a certain point, thought that the girl was dead. Is this correct?
That's the story that Lady Dedlock tells.
Okay. Now, the scene that we talked about.
That doesn't mean that it's
I
the
know.
only story. Yes.
I know. Yeah. so okay. I just try to see, and yeah, that's very interesting. By the way, what John explained to us about when we listen to Esther being the narrator, we have to remember that she is a narrator from memory or a narrator from far. But actually, in the chapters that we read now, it's very clear, because she herself said, as much as I remember, she describes scenes from memory and from the present. But okay, so when they get together first time in the church, and kind of Lady Dedlock looks at Esther and doesn't look at Esther, and then when they meet again after the storm, and we asked at the time, does Lady Dedlock know that Esther is her daughter?
That's a good question. What do you think?
I thought yes, but you convinced me no at the time. I think you convinced me that she doesn't know yet that she's her daughter. But when Esther is sick, she worries, right? She goes to Jenny, she picks up the handkerchief, she keeps it. So at some point, she knew that she's her daughter.
She knows she's her daughter. Esther knows that Lady Dedlock is her mother. When does that happen?
Yeah, when does it happen? She suspects when, because Lady Dedlock looks at her, gives her attention, then doesn't give her attention. So Esther is confused, right?
Yes, I don't think that in the church Esther knows.
Okay.
I think Lady Dedlock begins to know. I think Hortense knows at that point.
And we begin to know.
Well, we've been suspecting that all along.
Yeah.
It's not a surprise to us. It's a surprise to Lady Dedlock because that's the first time that she has seen Esther. Hortense, and we don't know much about Hortense, do we? Except that she stares at Lady Dedlock in the mirror.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And
so
for me, the point where Esther begins to know is that point when she says there was something. I can't quote it, but it's a strange impression that I was something different from what I then was.
Yeah.
And then Esther proceeds to fall ill. And it's the consequence of her falling ill that she's disfigured.
So what do you think triggered Lady Dedlock to tell Esther, I'm your mom, and asking for forgiveness?
Because she loves, she wants to have a daughter.
Yeah. She loves Esther. She loves Esther.
She believes that her child is dead.
Yeah.
And suddenly there is a child that she realizes is her daughter. And then she rejects her again.
So why is she exposing it? The rejection will hurt Esther, right?
Yes.
Does she do it for herself? She wants to know that she's forgiven. Why is she exposing herself to Esther?
She feels she must acknowledge her daughter because she had a daughter and she wants a daughter.
Yeah. Yeah.
So she has to tell her that I'm your mother and I love you, but I'm dead.
Yeah.
As far as you're concerned.
Yeah.
And Esther has to live with both the fantasy of the original rejection from her mother and with this adult knowledge of her mother's rejection, second rejection.
Yeah.
Which is even worse than the first one as an infant. But that trauma stays alive in her memory, in her play with the doll, in her burial of the doll, in the language that she uses as a narrator to say what the content of Lady Dedlock's letter was. I was never born. I had been buried. That's the memory that lies in Esther's unconscious. And you're right to talk about the time sequence of all of this, because in in the unconscious, there is no time. The past is still the present.
Yeah.
That fantasy of I was born dead, or even worse than that, I was born and then my mother killed me. My mother rejected me and buried me.
Interesting. What you brought up about her goodness is I totally, totally agree. The goodness that is that results from needing love. You need to be a very nice person to get love. Yeah.
Yes.
And it's genuine. It's both genuine.
It's exactly.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
it's she has to keep reminding herself to be.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
She jingles the
Keys.
keys.
Yeah.
Well, we've had pages and pages of Lady Dedlock's boredom and ennui, and you know the and you know looking at it realistically, what is Lord Dedlock going to do with a child? I mean, it's we've had lots of characterization of their lives that you know, it's hard to even imagine that she's, as I said when we looked at the picture, that suddenly she has this maternal instinct that, you know, she wants a doll, as John says. A doll would work all right. Oh, Kathy.
You're muted, Kathy.
Two things about Lady Dedlock and Esther. One is science is that, I mean, science and what we know about, present psychology, losing a baby puts the mother into incredible depression. Either the baby was stillborn or they died right after they were born. But that's proven today that, that society had always just sort of winged over the whole thing that, the woman would have another baby and she'd be okay. But I see that in Lady Dedlock. Because again, I know, John, you said, well, Lady Dedlock, you don't know whether she really knew that the baby wasn't dead, but let's just say she did. And the second thing is that among my many careers, I worked as a social worker with children who had been abandoned by their parents and moved them. It was a horrible job, and I decided that's why I went into aging. It's like was not going to move another, terribly upset child. But the reality is that what I found in doing that and having that job is, and these are foster kids, that no matter what, they will forgive their mother of anything and everything. That the very idea that they were their mother, the child just erases the bad part, and they'll do anything to get back with the parent. And I really see that in Esther. So I kind of disagree with you, John. I'm really sorry. But I feel like Esther, I know that that the symbolism in the book really does point to what you were talking about, but the doll, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I see Esther as being so relieved in that scene, and so, she's just like the kids I used to have to drive around to their 80th, foster home. They just want their damn mother back. And I use that as my case, my own experience.
I don't think it's a question of either or. I think both are true.
Yeah, probably.
And that is that Esther longs for a mother, and at the same time is hurt and
Yeah,
angry
that
at the
was true
mother
of
for
these
having
kids.
abandoned her. But
Right.
the other thing you say, let me just say this one
Yeah.
other thing, that uh, the consequences for the mother in such a situation are dire.
Yeah.
That Lady Dedlock's boredom and her coldness are an indication of how much she is suffering.
Yeah.
She has undergone the double loss of her child and the man she loves.
Right. Yeah, true.
And she is frozen. She is cold. I mean, when Guppy comes to her, the young man of the name of Guppy who knocks on the door, and he's found all the information and says, "Do you know such?" He interrogates her, and Lady Dedlock is frozen, and repeatedly the narrator says she was dead,
Mm-hmm.
and that deadness is Lady Dedlock's depression, at least
Even
in
the
the way.
name.
Yes, that's what I was just going to say. Yes, the name. Glenna?
Yeah, I think your interpretation is really interesting, John. I don't entirely buy it. What you just said, I think, how should I say? I go along with what you just said. I thought you were kind of underplaying the cost to a mother in Lady Dedlock's position. And I think what Kathy said about foster children years ago, when I was again teaching, there was an undergraduate who was giving birth out of wedlock, and somehow or other I was brought in to be her counselor and her comfort. And she was trying to decide whether or not to give her child up for adoption. I have never seen anyone in that kind of torment. I mean, she was so anguished. And she finally said, "I'm going to suffer no matter what. But if my child finds a good home, that's a better outcome for her." And that's how she finally made peace with the decision. But yes, I think that, and again, I think the first rejection, we know, again, from what we know about, there's all this psychological and sociological study now of the whole adoption process, that children who are given up for adoption are always trying to find out about the parent, the mother, and that there's a great trauma in knowing that somehow or other you were rejected. But I think that the scene under the tree, I think that Esther is grateful to have had the encounter with Lady Dedlock. And I think at some level she understands why Lady Dedlock, I mean, there's no happy ending at that point. I mean, Lady Dedlock can't say, "Oh, my child, now we can be a mother and daughter." It ain't going to happen that way. And I also think that, well, I definitely think that Esther's character is one of, a terribly psychologically damaged person who's projecting this sunniness and goodness to the best of her ability. But I don't think of it as false. I think of people who have been, I think false is too negative. I think people who have suffered that kind of trauma will create a persona that enables them to go out into the world and function. And I wouldn't call it false. I would call it adaptive. I would call it functional, that you have to, put on a happy face in order to move through the world. Because if you move through the world and you're constantly in touch with the pain, you're going to have a hard time functioning. But anyhow, Lots of food for thought, John. Thank you.
Well, we're not painting a very pretty picture of what adopted children or children in care turn out to be, are we? And since I have an adopted child, that I'm not certain that I totally agree with that picture. Yeah.
Well, pardon me, I didn't mean to imply that all adopted children. I happen to have a friend who wrote a book about her very dysfunctional relationship with her adopted son, and I've had that literature discussed with me, and maybe I also know lots of people who are adopted children who have done just great. So, Barbara, I did not mean to say anything that would be hurtful to you.
Not hurtful, not hurtful, just an observation. Karen?
Yeah, while I deeply appreciate John's overlay of psychoanalytic theory here with the sacrifice of self for meeting the demands of others, and this is an and, not a but, I would remind people that Bleak House was started in 1851. Freud was 5. So we have a whole 50-year expanse before psychoanalysis came to be. And I just always like to remind people of that when we start the psychoanalytic theory, which is always interesting, I think, to us. And maybe, Courtney, you could put I would invite everybody to read John's book on Bleak House, which I think takes this to a different level as well. The other comment I would like to make was back to John's notion of the cellular memory, which I think is really central here. This whole notion that we don't know what we know. It's in our cells from the beginning. It is there, it resides there. And I think this book is replete with cellular memory. It's also replete with repression. We as readers know what everybody is repressing, but they don't know it. And that's what just makes discussion of this book endlessly interesting. All of John's analysis and all of the way we look at all of these situations, it just never ends. You can take it in every different direction. So,
yes, I agree. Priscilla?
Hi. The other thing that I was going to bring up is that her rejection of Esther is also an act of self-preservation, because if her daughter were revealed, she'd lose her social standing. Lady Dedlock would, she lives in terror of her secret past surfacing. So that's just another aspect of another viewpoint of why she's rejecting her.
That's for me, that goes back to the scene where she sees Esther in the storm at the keeper's lodge and says, "Is it not dangerous to sit in such an exposed place?"
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And we don't know what she means by that, but one way to understand it, and one way I think that Esther probably understands it, is that, is it not dangerous to me, Lady Dedlock, for you to sit in such an exposed place? Because if the fact that you are my daughter gets exposed to the world, it will damage not only me and my social position, but my husband and his social position.
Well, on that note, don't forget we have this other layer going on here of Dickens' criticism of these social positions and how this society is structured. Cynthia?
Glenna made me realize in her comment that both Lady Dedlock and Esther have two different sides. Both of their sides are real, but they do different things. They perform different functions. And both Esther and Lady Dedlock have a personality that is protective of their trauma in some way. I really just now saw that parallel. And something that Karen said about not overlaying modern knowledge on an older work, I appreciate that. And I think that some of the brilliant authors could observe the way that people behave, and that here Dickens is reflecting on observation about how children who are what we would call damaged or hurt have a certain way of trying to be very, very, very good.
Well, Kathy. You're muted, Kathy.
I just want to say I agree with the last person who was speaking in that Dickens, a lot of his work was focused around the terrible treatment of kids. Himself as a young child in the blacking factory being one. And so that there's already, I think Dickens is very sympathetic to that situation. And also he, there's another, I mean, if we're really gonna, I think we're getting in too much into the weeds, and I don't want to go there, but I must say that you've got to figure out Rick's an orphan too. So, you know, and orphans, have a lot of problems as well that are very parallel to, a mother losing her child and a child losing their mother. So I'll leave it at that.
Okay, Sarah?
I just want to mention that Lady Dedlock allows her to tell the story to Jarndyce, which is very very meaningful to me.
Yeah.
Because does it mean she really cares about her? And Esther said he's like a dad for me, and she okay, she is not going to have a mom, but she'll have a dad, and she can open up with him and talk about those things.
During the time he's not in the growlery. Whatever. Can we, before we move, can we talk just a little bit about Tulkinghorn and what we learn about him in these chapters?
Ugh,
Ugh, she says.
I hate him. Sorry, I'm gonna mute myself.
Because he's really always lurking, right? We've got several lurking characters, but he's always lurking. Dorothy?
I put something in the chat. I have
Yeah.
a question. I had totally forgotten that George was in the same room as his mother. Or am I giving something away? Oh dear.
No,
Do you think George turned his back on purpose, or was it inadvertently? Did he not know that Mrs. Rouncewell was in the room?
that's I have a quote about that very thing, Dorothy. It's one of our cliffhangers is what's going on with her. And one way in the plot, she seems to be very convenient because she's the housekeeper at Chesney Wold, and she is privy to things that might help us move along. There it is, yes. Oops. Yeah, okay. The second quote, will somebody read it, please? No. No. Are you guys there? Yes. Okay, my heart warms, gentlemen, at the sight of you. It always does at the sight of such. God bless you, gentlemen. You'll excuse an old woman, but I had a son once who went for a soldier. A fine, handsome youth he was, and good in his bold way, though some people did disparage him to his poor mother. I ask your pardon for troubling you, sir. God bless you, gentlemen. What do you make out of that, Sarah?
Yeah, he decided that she'll have a happier life if she didn't know what happens with him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And later on, of course, George speaks to the Bagnier son and warns him always to be kind to his mother. So I'm thinking he really knew who was there and didn't turn on purpose. What do you think?
This was such a beautiful paragraph, but about the mother not getting a wrinkle at her old age due to you because you did something wrong. But I don't know a mother that won't get a wrinkle because she didn't have enough worries about her children without it being their fault.
Mm-hmm.
But it was a beautiful paragraph.
Yes. Well, it certainly does indicate that we have more about Mr. George to find out, right? We're not done finding out things about him.
What connection can there be?
Well, we've got the letters, first of all, right? He's had them. We're claiming that they've burned up. He has this list that he gives out, and who knows how he's yet involved with Hawden. Okay, Kathy.
Mute. I just wanted to say that, it's really obvious to me that a lot of this book is the repetitive theme of mother and child loss and parent and child loss. Because we really don't know about Rick, what his situation was, but he's in the lost parent situation as well. And that, doesn't seem to come up very often, but you have a lot of wounded children here and wounded mothers. And, I mean, I said this before, I think that, from Dickens' point of view, he literally, lost his parent and, he got them back and, but, it's a theme in Dickens. So anyway, that's all.
Well, and don't forget we've got the theme of the bad mothers and the bad fathers that 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 wasn't in this section very much. I think maw is mentioned a couple of times, but we've still got some of that hanging around in the story. I want to get to a couple of quotes that John about John's theory. I don't know what slide that is, but John, we can talk about them. Yeah. All right. Will somebody read the first one?
Yes, I'll read the first one.
Okay.
Oh, my child, I am your wicked and unhappy mother. Oh, try to forgive me. When I saw her at my feet on the bare earth, in her great agony of mind, I felt, through all my tumult of emotion, a burst of gratitude to the providence of God, that I was so changed as that I could never could disgrace her by any trace of likeness, as that nobody could ever now look at me and look at her, and remotely think of any near tie between us.
That's kind of the clearest one.
Yeah, that is. Yeah.
But John, refresh us. When did you say that she first figured out that she could use the smallpox to save her mother?
Well, here she attributes this to the providence of God.
Yeah.
And so my suggestion is that unconsciously she knows that her face is damaging and dangerous to her mother, and so she wants to dispose of the evidence in the only way she can, which is to efface herself or disface herself. So that there's an element of what I called autogenesis, or in a more scientific language, there, today we talk about illness or disease that is endogenous as opposed to exogenous. Exogenous disease comes from the outside, and endogenous disease comes from the inside. We might talk about genetic inheritance, or some people say that stress or trauma can cause a disease, and so I think it's and others would say it's fate or the providence of God that things happen. So we're in that area of uncertainty about causality, which is why I link this to spontaneous combustion. Because spontaneous combustion, there are different scientific explanations of it that say it comes from outside. Crook sits next to the fire. He's an alcoholic.
Yes.
Fire and alcohol produce flame. But in another theory of spontaneous combustion, it all comes from the inside. So
back
yes,
what I said some time ago about echoes of romanticism, which I can't remember who brought up Loveless, but we've got certainly in this case that idea that the face shows the character of a person. that you know, Edgar Allan Poe stories, and that you can tell by a person's face that my mother was raised by a very superstitious nanny, and my mother had all these things. Oh, look at his nose. His nose is too this, his eyes are too close together. It just means that he's evil, you know. And we have traces of that notion, I think, in the story. Well, let's read the last one and then let's stop. Will somebody read the last one?
I'll read it.
Okay.
I hope it may not appear very unnatural or bad in me that I then became heavily sorrowful to think I had ever been reared, that I felt as if I knew it would have been better and happier for many people if indeed I had never breathed, that I had a terror of myself as the danger and the possible disgrace of my own mother and of a proud family name, that I was so confused and shaken as to be possessed by a belief that was right and had been intended, that I should die in my birth.
Pat?
So is this Esther talking?
Yes.
Okay. Is she talking as a narrator, or I don't know that matters.
Well,
I'm just
it's in 36, which I think is
yeah, I see
her,
that.
yeah, her
Yeah.
narration.
I'm completely missed that she so blatantly talked about that. So maybe now I need to agree with John that yeah, that she was protecting her mother from the danger of her being recognized. I'll have to think about that again and reread that chapter.
Yeah. In the proud family name, I'm going to have to think about that a little bit too. Yeah.
May I ask, Lady Dedlock never had other children? Was there a particular reason? Were we told?
Well, nowadays, wouldn't we say that if she got pregnant by somebody else and not by her husband, but maybe her husband had a problem?
But we've never in the novel does it say
No,
anywhere.
no.
Okay, thank you.
On page 21, chapter 2 of the novel, narrated by the omniscient or impersonal narrator, my Lady Dedlock, parenthesis, who is childless, looking out in the early twilight from her boudoir at a keeper's lodge and seeing the light of a fire upon the latticed panes and smoke rising from the chimney, and a child chased by a woman running out into the rain to meet the shining figure of a wrapped up man coming through the gate, has been put quite out of temper. My Lady Dedlock says she has been bored to death. So no, there's no explanation, but the narrator is wrong in saying my Lady Dedlock was childless.
Yes.
And the keeper's lodge appears there. And I even think that there's a significance in that keeper's lodge mentioned, you know, this early in the novel, chapter 2, the keeper's lodge appears, and that's of course where Lady Dedlock comes to Esther when there's the storm. And what is a keeper's lodge? What's a keeper?
Maybe a gamekeeper, a groundsman, a huntsman.
It's a gamekeeper or a groundskeeper, but is Lady Dedlock a keeper or not a keeper of her daughter?
She's a keeper of secrets.
Not a keeper.
Yeah, well,
She's a keeper of secrets.
and
But
back to what Sarah said about the timeline. When did all this happen? When did she become pregnant? Well, you know.
yeah, we don't know that, but there are these slightly different stories that are circulating about what happened at the moment of birth. Do you remember what the first thing is that Esther does, almost the first thing when she comes to London in chapter 3? Do you remember Peepee?
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
What does she do with Peepee?
She takes care of him.
She mothers him.
Yes.
How?
Lady Dedlock also mothers Rosa.
Yes. But stick with Peepee for just a second. You'll laugh at this. Peepee is Mrs. Jellyby's son,
Yes.
and Mrs. Jellyby is one of the bad mothers in the novel. And Peepee's got his head stuck in the railing.
That's right.
And they're pulling on his feet and they can't get it out. And Esther shows up, and Esther, good old Esther, pulls him out by his head.
Yes. Yes.
Delivering a baby.
Yes. All right.
Could I ask a question? I just want to know, how does Lady Dedlock know that the handkerchief belongs to Esther?
I don't know.
The coal miner's wife tells her when she goes to that house.
Oh.
Jenny.
Oh.
And she asks for it to take that handkerchief.
Isn't this something that Mrs. Flight tells? Mrs. Flight tells a story, right, about it?
Yes.
Yes.
It's a good question, and we should look it up and come back with an answer for Glenna.
Yes. Yes. Right.
See you guys next month. Come with a passage that you would like us to talk about.
Thank you so much, John.
Glenna will be our discussion leader. So thank you, Barb.
Thank you, Bob.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for indulging me in
Combustion.
Bye.
Our privilege.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.